Hey everyone, it's Sevy. If you've seen Raiden Shogun's Constellations, you'll notice that her C2 sounds very impressive on paper and looks like an insane damage boost. Now, there's been a lot of theoretical math videos on this already, but I wanted to see for myself just how big of a difference this makes in practice against her C0 damage. And since I got her C3, which also upgrades her burst talent levels, it's also going to be part of my testing showcase. So, if you're curious how her constellations perform on the battlefield, whether you're trying to get more constellations on her or wondering what you're missing out on, then keep on watching. If you enjoy my content, subscribe to my channel. It really helps me a lot. Now let's begin. Before the actual test footage, let me quickly discuss what C1 to C3 does, my testing methodology, and the builds on the characters I used for this test. On Constellation 1, Raiden can collect resolve stacks faster from teammates' bursts. This doesn't directly show in terms of damage, so we're not going to perform a test on this. However, the end result is that her burst has incremental damage. On Constellation 2, Raiden's attacks from her burst ignores 60% of the opponent's defense. I kind of find it interesting that they use the word ignore, but I'm guessing it's cause that lowered defense can only be in place when it's Raiden attacking and no one else. In theory, this is a really big defense shred, but let's see it later in practice. Constellation 3 adds 3 more levels to Raiden's burst. Since that's her main source of damage, those 3 levels are quite significant here. We are going to look at Raiden as a DPS here. Yes, she only has a small window, but let's see how efficiently she spends that window depending on constellations. This damage test will be versus the Primo Geo Bishop. How much can Raiden do within one cycle of her burst DPS window? We will be testing Raiden's output on each constellation under different circumstances. These circumstances will be Raiden by herself, Raiden with an Animo Viridescent Venerer Shredder, Raiden with an attack buff from Bennett, and a full comp of Raiden with a resistance shredder and attack buff. All these comps have Zhongli included for his meaty shield. He also shreds the opponent's resistance, so that will remain constant all throughout the tests. We'll be going through her C0 as a baseline, skipping C1 since it doesn't directly affect her damage, and then showing her C2 and C3 damage. At the end, I'll give my final thoughts on how these constellations fare for her as a burst DPS. Note that before each test, her resolve stacks are refreshed to 0. Obviously, resolve stacks will boost damage more within a fight, but for the purposes of our test, it's hard to get max stacks each time, so we have a consistent baseline of 0 at the start. I also made sure that in every clip, the first burst damage was a crit. Now let's go through the character builds. Here are Raiden's stats. We're using R1 Engulfing Lightning here, so she has her best in slot equipped. She's using a 4-piece emblem of Severed Fate, Talents 668. Zhongli has a beginner's protector pole arm, so he's just here for shielding and extra shred from his shield. He also only has a 2-piece tenacity so that we don't get any other extra artifact effects. Venti is here only for his Viridescent Venerer resistance shred Swirl. He's on a hunter's bow, so he also barely does any damage. Bennett here is using the Alley Flash for a high base attack transfer. He's only using a 2-piece noblesse, so we don't get any extra buffs from him. Bennett's on C6 here, and his burst is talent level 11. These are the methodology and parameters to be controlled. My main goal is to see the damage difference between each of Raiden's constellations with the most common support buffs and to reduce as many extra variables as possible, not to show whether Raiden is the best, the most broken, or a very meta character in whatever situation. So with all of that clear, let's proceed to the test clips. I will first show the C0 versus C2 side-by-side comparison. Then I will show the C2 versus C3 comparison, giving you an idea of the estimated increase per constellation. I will pause the clips in her first critical hit and at the end of her burst cycle to show how much of the Geo Bishop's HP has been reduced. Now let's begin. So at this point between C0 and C2, there's already about a 50% increase in her initial strike damage from 51,000 to almost 74,000. from C2 to C3, her strike damage goes up to 92.5 thousand. So between C0 and C3, the increase in damage is about 80%. The Viridescent Venerer Shred addition leads to 61k on her initial slash on C0 and almost 88k on C2. Between that, there's a 40% increase. On C3, her slash goes up to 104k damage. Compared to her C0, that's a 70% increase. We can see that the Viridescent Shred increased her C0 baseline a bit, but the difference is still quite big. Now with Bennett's attack buff, her C0 strike hits 75k. On C2, she hits a very nice number, 96969. From C0 to C2 with Bennett buff, the increase is now around 28%. On C3, her initial strike here reaches 131k. That's around an 84% increase from her C0 strike under the same conditions. So in this last combo, we're skipping C2 and just showing you the difference between C0 and C3 since we pretty much have an idea of the damage increase trend. You can see that the damage difference is massive, almost double. Though she hits 89k on C0, she hits a whopping almost 153k on C3. And at the end of her burst, the HP reflects this too. So there you have it, we can see the difference for ourselves in these practical tests. Does it mean that she's weak at C0? Not necessarily, but this does show that much of her power is gated at these constellations. You get a very considerable damage boost at C2 and an insanely huge damage boost when you hit C3. Her main DPS potential just skyrockets and you kill everything much faster. It's actually good value if you compare it to other characters' constellations, but from my experience playing her at C0 with talent level 6, the hardest content can still be cleared just perfectly fine. If you are willing to invest in her constellations, then this is good news for you. But this huge difference between C0 Raiden and C3 Raiden might not be good news for free-to-play players because these constellations aren't accessible to them. Though Raiden's kit is pretty much whole at C0, her constellations added so much damage that you can't help but feel a bit shortchanged if you just get her at C0. But guys, that's my opinion. So now that you've seen her constellations in action, what do you think? Let me know in the comments, please. If this video helped you out, please do leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell button. I will see you soon. Take care!